In the quiet, pre-dawn hours of an ordinary morning, the town of Crestwood lay swathed in a gentle mist that blurred the boundaries between the old world and the new. The sleepy streets, lined with time-worn brick buildings and ancient trees, seemed to hold secrets of their own, secrets whispered by the wind and carried on the murmurs of forgotten legends. In the heart of this town stood a modest yoga studio, its unassuming facade belying the sanctuary it housed within. Soft strains of early music mingled with the faint aroma of incense, setting the stage for what appeared to be another day of tranquility and mindful practice. Yet, behind this veneer of calm, fate was poised to intertwine two very different worlds. At the center of this oasis was Elena, a woman whose serene presence and gentle smile had earned her the reputation of a compassionate guide in the art of yoga. To her students, she embodied peace, radiating an inner calm that seemed to invite healing and self-discovery. Few, however, knew that behind Elena's measured composure lay a past marked by danger and covert battles. Years ago, she had been a member of an elite special forces unit, a life where every decision was a calculated risk and every breath a reminder of the fine line between life and death. That world of high stakes and adrenaline had not completely faded. Instead, its lessons had been woven into the very fabric of her being. It was these hidden depths that lent her both a fierce determination and a rare inner strength, qualities that now manifested in every carefully guided pose and every deliberate, soothing breath. Inside the studio, soft rays of morning sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting golden hues over polished wooden floors and walls adorned with intricate mandalas and ancient symbols. The space was arranged with thoughtful care. Yoga mats lay in precise rows, and a small altar featured flickering candles and potted plants that exuded life and hope. The atmosphere was one of deliberate serenity, a place where the chaotic clamor of the outside world was left at the door, replaced instead by the gentle rhythm of mindful movement and meditation. As Elena prepared for her first class of the day, her thoughts wandered briefly to the path that had led her here. The transition from the harsh reality of military operations to the introspective discipline of yoga had not been smooth. There had been days when the ghosts of her past haunted her quiet moments, and nights when the memories of covert missions and split-second decisions replayed in relentless cycles. Yet, with time, she had learned to channel that turbulent energy into her practice. Every stretch, every pose, became both a meditation and a subtle reclamation of control over her life. The studio, with its gentle hum of early activity, was a testament to that transformation, a place where the scars of war could find solace in the embrace of peace. Outside, however, the calm was deceptive. As the first hints of life stirred on the street, a deep, resonant hum began to seep through the quiet morning. It was a sound that did not belong to the natural rhythms of birdsong or rustling leaves. Instead, it was the mechanical purr of motorcycle engines, a sound that spoke of raw power and imminent disruption. The engines grew louder, their vibrations faintly felt beneath the polished floorboards of the studio, signaling the arrival of a presence far removed from the delicate practices of yoga. For months, the notorious biker gang known as the Iron Syndicate had been a dark undercurrent in Crestwood. Their reputation was built on intimidation and the exercise of brute force, a stark contrast to the gentle, contemplative life that Elena now led. Rumors swirled in hushed tones about the gang's exploits and their relentless claim over the town's streets. Today, their presence was unmistakable, and the air outside the studio buzzed with an undercurrent of menace. As Elena welcomed her early morning class with soft smiles and calm instructions, her keen senses remained alert to the subtle disturbances outside. She had learned long ago that the world rarely allowed peace to remain unchallenged. Even as her students moved through slow, deliberate sequences, her eyes periodically drifted to the window, where vague silhouettes hinted at an approaching storm. A primal alertness, honed by years of covert operations, stirred within her, a reminder that danger often crept in the guise of the mundane. It wasn't long before that danger made its presence known in full. A sleek black motorcycle pulled up outside the studio with deliberate precision, its engine's low roar echoing like a challenge in the stillness of the early day. One by one, more motorcycles arrived, their riders clad in battered leather and heavy boots. These were the men of the Iron Syndicate, and their arrival was no mere coincidence. It was a calculated move meant to assert control and intimidate. The leader of the gang, a broad-shouldered man marked by the scars of many battles, was the first to dismount. His eyes, dark and penetrating, swept over the building with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Rumors had reached him of a yoga instructor with an enigmatic past, a past that, if true, could make her more than just an easy target for his gang's dominance. With measured steps, he approached the door, his every movement exuding the raw confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. Elena sensed the disturbance even before the door opened. Stepping away from her class with a composed urgency, she moved toward the entrance, her mind simultaneously calm and razor-sharp. As the door swung open, the cool morning air, tinged with the scent of oil and leather, rushed in. There, framed by the early light, stood the biker leader, his gaze locked onto hers in a silent exchange that spoke volumes. His voice, rough as gravel and laced with disdain, broke the silence. "What do we have here?" he drawled, his tone mocking yet tinged with an unspoken challenge. "A little sanctuary in the middle of our territory." Elena's reply was measured and calm, a stark contrast to the harshness of his tone. "Peace is not a concession," she said softly, her eyes reflecting a depth of resolve. "It is a choice, a discipline that one must cultivate, not force upon others." Her words carried the weight of someone who had lived through tumultuous battles and had emerged with an understanding that true strength was not found in brute force but in the mastery of oneself. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The biker leader's hardened features flickered with surprise, and his comrades exchanged glances that mixed curiosity with a grudging respect. In that suspended instant, Elena's dual nature was laid bare, the gentle yoga instructor who nurtured peace, and the formidable former operative whose past battles had honed an inner fire that could ignite at any provocation. Inside the studio, the early class had paused, the normally rhythmic hum of meditative practice falling silent as eyes turned toward the unfolding confrontation. The space that had been so meticulously arranged for calm was now charged with an electric tension. Every object, the flickering candles, the smooth surfaces of polished wood, even the intricate patterns on the mandala, seemed to take on a new significance, as if bearing silent witness to the clash of ideologies now unfolding at the door. The biker leader stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I hear there are whispers about you," he said in a low voice, each word deliberate and heavy. "Whispers of a past that doesn't fit the picture of a simple yoga instructor." His tone was not entirely hostile. It was a challenge, a test of the limits of Elena's calm in the face of raw, unbridled defiance. Elena met his gaze steadily. "My past is mine," she replied, her voice steady and calm. "It has taught me that every soul carries both light and shadow. The choices I make today are what define me, not the battles I fought long ago." Her words, though soft, resonated with a strength that transcended the immediate threat. They carried the weight of years spent in environments where every decision was a matter of survival, and where the cost of hesitation was measured in lives lost. As the biker leader's eyes flickered with an inscrutable mix of amusement and grudging respect, a subtle shift took place in the atmosphere. The gang, united by a shared need to assert dominance, began to form a loose circle around the studio. Their motorcycles, symbols of a raw, unapologetic power, stood as silent sentinels outside the fragile wall of peace that Elena had built. The early morning light, which had bathed the scene in a golden glow, now cast long, dramatic shadows that accentuated the stark contrast between the serene interior of the studio and the rough-edged determination of the bikers. Elena stepped back, her mind briefly drifting to the long, winding road that had led her away from the covert world of special forces. In those days, every mission was a crucible, a test of discipline, courage, and resolve. There had been moments when the weight of decisions made in the heat of battle had seemed unbearable, yet it was in those crucibles that her spirit had been tempered. Each memory of danger, each scar borne silently on her skin, had contributed to the strength she now possessed. The lessons learned on battlefields far removed from the gentle stretches of a yoga mat were not easily forgotten, and though she had long since exchanged her combat boots for yoga sandals, the discipline and fortitude of her former life remained ever present. Outside, the biker leader exchanged a look with one of his lieutenants, a younger man whose hardened features betrayed both a hunger for challenge and a glimmer of uncertainty. "You speak of discipline," the lieutenant said, his voice softer than his leader's but no less intense. "But can someone who has known war truly embrace peace without hiding the shadows of their past?" His question, posed not as an accusation but as a genuine inquiry, hung in the air, drawing the attention of everyone present. Elena's response was measured, thoughtful. "The past is not a chain that binds us," she replied, her tone imbued with both conviction and vulnerability. "It is the soil from which we grow. Yes, I have seen darkness, and yes, I have been forged in its flames, but it is through that fire that I learned to appreciate the brilliance of the light. The journey from war to peace is not a simple renunciation but a transformation, a melding of the lessons of survival with the wisdom of compassion." As the conversation unfolded, the world outside seemed to pause in quiet expectancy. The rumble of motorcycle engines mingled with the distant call of birds, creating an unlikely symphony that underscored the dramatic meeting of two disparate worlds. The bikers, so used to asserting dominance through sheer force and intimidation, now found themselves confronted by a strength that was far more subtle, a strength rooted in self-awareness, discipline, and a resolve that had weathered the storms of both combat and inner turmoil. The leader, his gaze still locked on Elena, took a step closer. "I can see that your eyes hold stories not many could ever understand," he said quietly. "Stories of battles fought in the silence of the mind, of wars waged in the quiet corners of the soul." His words, though few, carried the weight of someone who had been hardened by life's trials yet was not entirely immune to the power of redemption. In that charged moment, the boundaries between aggressor and mediator, between past and present, blurred. Elena's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the familiar rhythm of readiness. She knew that every moment, every breath, was a precious link between the world she had once known and the one she now sought to create. The studio, with its soft light and gentle warmth, stood as a beacon of possibility, a promise that even the darkest histories could yield to the transformative power of compassion and understanding. Then, as if to punctuate the gravity of the encounter, a sudden disturbance rippled through the assembled crowd. A breathless messenger, disheveled and desperate, burst through the studio's door. His eyes darted about wildly as he clutched a crumpled envelope. "Miss Elena," he stammered, his voice laden with urgency. "There's trouble at the north gate, a disturbance that demands your attention." The words barely had time to settle before a thunderous crash echoed from outside, a sound that seemed to split the air with the promise of impending chaos. The messenger's arrival was a catalyst. The bikers shifted their stance, the earlier tension giving way to an anticipatory edge as the promise of conflict loomed larger. Elena, ever the embodiment of calm and purpose, felt the full weight of the moment. The duality of her existence, the peace she now fostered and the lethal precision honed in years of combat, merged into one undeniable force. In that instant, every memory of training, every moment of close-quarters combat, surged forth in silent determination. There was no room for hesitation. Every decision would be measured in the balance between maintaining her sanctuary and confronting the forces that threatened it. Drawing on the well of inner strength forged in the crucible of her former life, Elena stepped forward to address both the messenger and the assembled bikers. "I understand there is disturbance," she said calmly, her voice steady and resolute. "But I believe that even in the midst of conflict, there is a way to find a measure of understanding. Let us not allow this moment to spiral into needless violence." Her words were not a plea for surrender but a declaration of purpose, a promise that even under the weight of chaos, her commitment to preserving the sanctity of her space would guide her actions. The leader of the bikers, whose eyes had softened ever so slightly at her measured tone, responded with a low, thoughtful murmur. "Perhaps you are more than you seem, Elena," he conceded. "Perhaps your story is one of transformation, a reminder that even the fiercest warriors can find redemption in peace." The acknowledgement was tentative but significant, an unspoken invitation to bridge the chasm between two worlds that, until that moment, had been irreconcilable. As the morning unfolded into a long, reflective day, The studio transformed into a space where the raw energy of conflict and the gentle pulse of meditation coexisted in an uneasy balance. Elena guided the bikers and her regular students alike through a series of meditative practices, encouraging each person to find the stillness within, a silence that could serve as the foundation for healing and mutual respect. In that quiet communion, the barriers that had once divided them began to dissolve, replaced by a shared understanding that the past, no matter how turbulent, could be the seedbed for a better future. For hours, the dialogue between the two sides continued in a mixture of conversation, silence, and reflective introspection. Elena moved among her guests with a graceful assurance that belied the internal storm of memories and instincts. She recounted lessons from her past without divulging the full horrors of her former life, choosing instead to focus on the principles of discipline, courage, and redemption. Her narrative, woven with both vulnerability and strength, resonated deeply with even the most hardened members of the biker gang. As the sun began its slow descent and the day shifted into a reflective twilight, a sense of cautious optimism filled the space. The bikers, once symbols of unyielding aggression, now sat quietly in meditation alongside Elena's regular students, a tableau of unexpected unity born from the collision of two very different worlds. In that shared silence, every heart present seemed to acknowledge that the path ahead, though uncertain, held the promise of transformation if only old grudges could be set aside. In the soft glow of the fading light, as shadows stretched long across the studio floor, Elena closed her eyes and took a deep, measured breath. In that singular moment, the echoes of her past, of battles fought and lives saved, merged with the gentle cadence of the present. Every scar, every memory, was a testament not only to the violence of her former existence, but also to the redemptive power of change. The studio had become more than just a place of yoga. It was a crucible where the raw materials of conflict were being reshaped into a new narrative, a narrative where compassion and strength walked hand in hand. And so, as the final light of day surrendered to the quiet of the coming night, Elena remained a steadfast guardian of her sanctuary. The encounter with the Iron Syndicate had opened a door to possibilities that neither side had anticipated. It was a beginning, a long, winding journey that promised both danger and hope, conflict and reconciliation. In the stillness that followed, every sound, every breath spoke of a future where the ghosts of war could finally give way to the healing balm of understanding. In that moment, Elena silently vowed that no matter what trials lay ahead, she would protect this space with the full measure of her strength. The legacy of her past, forged in the fires of battle and tempered by years of introspection, was not a burden but a beacon, a reminder that true power lies in the courage to transform one's life, to rise above the forces of destruction and build something lasting from the ruins of yesterday. Thus, as the night deepened and the studio was bathed in the gentle luminescence of moonlight streaming through the windows, the story of Elena, the yoga instructor with a hidden past, took its first long, deliberate breath. It was a story that promised twists, revelations, and challenges yet to come. It was a story of contrasts, of serenity meeting savagery, of the tender art of yoga interlaced with the hardened resolve of a former soldier. It was a story of hope born from conflict, and of the possibility that even the most unlikely alliances could spark the light of redemption in the darkest of times. The aftermath of the tense standoff at the studio left a heavy residue of anticipation in the cool morning air. The echo of the messenger's urgent warning, "Trouble at the North Gate," still vibrated in Elena's mind as she steadied herself, her thoughts racing like the shifting winds outside. The bikers of the Iron Syndicate, who moments earlier had circled her sanctuary with a mix of defiance and unexpected deference, now maintained a vigilant silence. Their leader, whose eyes had softened into something resembling respect, lingered near the threshold, as though unwilling to relinquish the palpable connection that had just been forged. Elena, sensing that the disturbance was far from a mere idle threat, stepped away from the studio with measured resolve. The delicate cadence of her yoga practice was momentarily replaced by the primal rhythm of readiness that had been etched into her soul during years spent in covert operations. With a quiet nod to the biker leader, she conveyed that she would investigate the source of the disturbance herself, but she did not entirely dismiss the offer of backup. "Keep a watchful eye here," she said softly, her voice calm yet imbued with authority. I will be back before the shadows lengthen. The leader's nod was curt but understanding, and he signaled to a few of his men to remain on standby while he accompanied her at a discreet distance. Stepping outside, Elena's eyes scanned the horizon where the first rays of sunlight mingled with the lingering haze of dawn. The world outside was a patchwork of muted colors, the warm glow of street lamps fading against the encroaching light, the deep green of nearby woodlands giving way to the dusty browns of the roads that led toward the north gate. As she walked briskly along the narrow lane that skirted the edge of town, her every step resonated with a quiet determination. Each footfall was a calculated measure, a stark reminder that even as she embraced the peaceful discipline of yoga, the specter of her former life was never far behind. The biker leader rode alongside her on a sleek, dark motorcycle. His presence was a silent testament to the fragile, newly forged alliance between worlds that were once utterly incompatible. As the two moved in tandem along the deserted backroads, the atmosphere was charged with unspoken questions. The leader's eyes, dark and watchful beneath a furrowed brow, occasionally met Elena's own. There was an intensity there, a silent dialogue that hinted at mutual respect for the unyielding strength that lay beneath her gentle exterior. They reached the outskirts of town, where the road widened into a more rugged, less maintained path. Here, the terrain took on a wilder aspect. Scraggly shrubs and weathered boulders marked the passage, and the air held a tang of earth and distant rain. Elena's senses were heightened. With the same precision that had once guided her through hostile territories and far-flung corners of the world, she noted every rustle, every shift of light and shadow among the trees that bordered the road. The north gate lay ahead, a relic of a once vibrant industrial district, now partially reclaimed by nature and time. As they approached the gate, the world seemed to slow. The morning stillness was punctuated by subtle disturbances, the sound of shifting metal, hushed voices that drifted on the wind, and the unmistakable scent of fuel and sweat. The gate itself was an imposing structure of rusted iron and weathered wood, a barrier that had once marked the boundary of an industrial empire. Now, however, it served as the stage for an unfolding drama. Elena's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the scene. A cluster of figures moved with furtive intent near the entrance of an old warehouse that had been converted, against all odds, into a makeshift stronghold. Shadows shifted in the dim light, and the murmurs of low, urgent conversations reached her ears. It was clear that these were not local troublemakers. They moved with a calculated precision that hinted at military training and a determination born of long-held grudges. Their faces were obscured by hoods and bandanas, their hands resting on the hilts of weapons that gleamed dully even in the low light. The disturbance here was more than a random act of vandalism. It was the orchestrated work of an organized cell with clear objectives. Without drawing attention, Elena signaled for the biker leader to stop a few yards away. In a low, almost imperceptible voice, she said, "I must see for myself." He responded with a terse nod, his eyes never leaving the suspicious figures. Elena moved forward, her body slipping into the shadows like a wraith. Each step was calculated, a dance between stealth and purpose. The years of training in high-stakes operations had taught her how to merge with her surroundings, to become an indistinguishable part of the night. As she edged closer to the warehouse, Elena recalled fragments of past missions that were now memories tinged with both regret and fierce pride. In the back alleys of foreign cities and the remote, hostile territories where her former unit had operated, she had learned to navigate treacherous terrain and decipher the subtle language of danger. The rustle of dry leaves underfoot, the creak of old wood, even the faintest sound in the darkness, each held meaning, a coded signal that could mean the difference between life and death. Tonight, those same instincts flared alive within her, interlacing with the calm focus of a yoga practitioner who had mastered her body and mind. In the periphery of her vision, a figure detached itself from the crowd of intruders. It was a man whose stance was too deliberate, too confident for one operating in the shadows. His eyes, though partially hidden under the brim of a battered cap, flickered with recognition when they met Elena's. In that brief, charged moment, the distance between her past and present seemed to vanish. For an instant, the man hesitated, as if caught between two worlds, a hesitation that was all too brief for the seasoned warrior he had once been. Elena's heart pounded in quiet rhythm, the old, familiar surge of adrenaline mingling with the calm of her present self. Before she could gather her thoughts, a slight misstep, a twig snapping underfoot, betrayed her presence. The man's head snapped in her direction, and his eyes widened in alertness. He barked a short command into a concealed earpiece, and the quiet night was suddenly shattered by the sound of shifting bodies. Within seconds, a swarm of the intruders turned their focus toward the source of the disturbance. Elena's pulse quickened, yet her expression remained composed as she melted further into the shadows. Every fiber of her being was now on high alert. Realizing that the moment for quiet observation had passed, Elena stepped into the dim glow of a flickering street lamp that illuminated the warehouse's entrance. In that instant, the stillness exploded into chaos. A pair of gruff voices rose in anger as one of the armed men advanced, his hand reaching for a weapon. Elena moved with the fluidity of water, her body shifting from a state of serene mindfulness to that of a trained operative, in the blink of an eye. Without a sound, she intercepted his motion, her hand clapping down on his wrist with a force that belied her gentle demeanor. The man gasped, a sharp cry lost amidst the ensuing clamor, as Elena's grip neutralized his threat before he could even draw his sidearm. The sudden burst of movement sent shockwaves through the intruding group. In a flurry of precise, calculated motions, Elena became both the embodiment of grace and the harbinger of retribution. She moved like a shadow across the ground, her body executing a series of strikes and blocks that were as beautiful as they were lethal. Each movement was deliberate, a perfect blend of her honed combat skills and the meditative focus that yoga had instilled in her over the years. She redirected the momentum of her attacker, using his own force against him with a series of swift parries and strikes that left him disoriented and sprawled on the cold, rough ground. For those few agonizing seconds, the world contracted to the space between her measured breaths and the rapid cadence of her heart. The intruders, momentarily stunned by the sudden display of martial prowess, hesitated, a pause that was quickly exploited by the woman who had once been one of the most formidable operators in an elite special forces unit. With fluid precision, Elena transitioned from defense to offense. Her hands and feet moved with a rhythmic intensity, each strike a testament to years of disciplined training and the relentless pursuit of perfection. The clash of bodies and the grunts of exertion mingled with the ambient sounds of the night, composing a brutal symphony that echoed against the cold concrete of the warehouse. From their concealed vantage point, the biker gang watched in silent astonishment. The leader's eyes widened as he beheld the transformation of the woman they had once seen only as a peaceful instructor. His hardened features softened momentarily in awe as he recognized the unmistakable precision of combat, the disciplined footwork, the calculated strikes, the controlled power behind each motion. It was as though the ghost of her past had been summoned, an indomitable force that transcended the boundaries of her gentle exterior. Even the younger bikers, whose lives had been defined by the rough-and-tumble world of the open road, exchanged glances of incredulity and a burgeoning respect that could only be born of witnessing raw, unfiltered talent in action. Yet the battle was far from one-sided. The intruders, reeling from the initial onslaught, rallied quickly under the command of their shadowy leader. Shouts rang out, and the calculated chaos resumed as they attempted to regroup and launch a coordinated counterattack. Elena, ever the picture of calm determination, adjusted her stance and assessed the threat. Her mind raced through a catalogue of possibilities, a mental inventory of the skills she had once relied on in high-intensity combat scenarios. In that charged moment, every lesson learned in the crucible of war flashed vividly before her eyes. She recalled the sting of cold wind on barren battlefields, the weight of decisions made in the blink of an eye, and the unwavering resolve that had once carried her through the darkest nights of conflict. As two more adversaries converged on her position, their faces contorted with the fury of impending defeat, Elena's inner calm crystallized into decisive action. She sidestepped a clumsy lunge, her body moving with a fluid grace that defied expectation, and delivered a series of rapid, surgical strikes. The clash was not loud, it was a quiet, deadly exchange of energy and focus. The attackers, now reeling from the precision of her counterattacks, faltered. In the brief lull that followed, Elena's eyes scanned the perimeter. In the distance, a soft murmur of voices signaled that reinforcements were on their way for the intruders. Her intuition, honed by years of survival, told her that these men were not acting independently. They were part of a larger, more sinister design. Amid the flurry of conflict, Elena's gaze locked onto one figure, a man whose presence exuded an air of cold efficiency. His stance was unmistakably familiar, and for a fleeting moment, recognition sparked in her eyes. This was no ordinary thug. There was something in his eyes, a certain glint that betrayed his past, that whispered of old alliances and former enemies. As he stepped forward with deliberate menace, his lips curled into a wry smile that spoke of memories long buried. "I never thought our paths would cross again," he murmured in a voice that was both mocking and laced with a hint of regret. In that single, charged sentence, the tapestry of Elena's former life, the missions, the sacrifices, the betrayals, seemed to unravel just enough to offer a tantalizing glimpse of a past that had been meticulously concealed. Before any words could be exchanged, the intensity of the encounter surged once more. The mercenary's subtle challenge was met with Elena's unyielding resolve. With an almost imperceptible shift in her stance, she neutralized his approach with a deft maneuver that left him momentarily disarmed and on the defensive. His smirk faded into a grimace of shock, and for a heartbeat, the world held its breath as the scales of fate seemed to balance precariously on the edge of remembrance and renewal. The battle raged on in a series of fluid, interwoven movements. Elena's every gesture was both an echo of her past and a reaffirmation of her newfound path. The intruders, despite their numbers and coordination, were gradually forced back by the unyielding tide of her skill and determination. She danced through the melee, each strike and parry executed with the precision of a master and the calm assurance of one who had long transcended the realm of fear. It was a ballet of violence and serenity, a breathtaking fusion of lethal efficiency and the mindful grace of a seasoned yogi. Behind the immediate fray, the biker leader and a few of his trusted companions emerged from their cover to witness the unfolding spectacle. Their earlier bravado had given way to a profound silence, a reverent pause as they recognized that the woman they had so casually underestimated was, in fact, a force unto herself. The leader's gaze, once shrouded in skepticism, now burned with the intensity of admiration tinged with a dawning realization. The Iron Syndicate, known for their fierce reputation on the open road, found themselves confronting a truth that shattered preconceived notions about strength, vulnerability, and redemption. In the midst of the combat, as the intruders began to falter under the relentless onslaught, a sudden, discordant sound shattered the already chaotic symphony, a staccato burst of footsteps, heavy and determined, approaching from behind. Elena's heightened senses picked up the threat before her mind could fully process it. Instinctively, she spun, her body reacting with a speed that belied the calm expression on her face. A group of additional assailants, drawn by the clamor and evidently reinforcements for the original contingent, had arrived. Their eyes glimmered with a cold resolve, and the unmistakable clink of metal told her that they were armed to the teeth. For a fleeting second, the air was thick with uncertainty. Elena, her breathing controlled and her muscles taut with readiness, surveyed the new threat. In that charged moment, the boundaries between past and present blurred once more. Her mind raced back to nights spent in hostile territories where every second counted, where the margin between survival and defeat was measured in split seconds. With an inward exhalation that seemed to echo across the barren landscape, she re-engaged. The ensuing clash was even more ferocious, a whirlwind of calculated strikes and defensive maneuvers that turned the darkened alley into a crucible of raw, untempered energy. Every collision of bodies, every whispered curse and cry of exertion, was a testament to the duality of her existence, a life that had once been defined by the chaos of warfare and now sought to reclaim order through inner peace. The intruders, caught in the vortex of her formidable skill, found themselves ensnared in a web of her making. One by one, they were disarmed, incapacitated, or forced to retreat into the darkness from whence they came. The echo of their retreating footsteps mingled with the fading sound of the confrontation, leaving behind a silence that was as profound as it was unsettling. With the immediate threat quelled and the last of the assailants vanishing into the night, Elena paused amid the wreckage of what had just transpired. The ground was littered with the unconscious forms of her attackers, and the cool night air seemed to still the rapid beat of her heart. For several long, waited moments she allowed herself a brief respite, a silent acknowledgement of the cost of defending not only her sanctuary but also the fragile peace that had been so painstakingly constructed. The adrenaline ebbed slowly, leaving in its wake a mixture of satisfaction, regret, and an inescapable awareness of the heavy burdens borne by those who had once lived in the shadows of conflict. In the dim glow of the flickering streetlights, Elena crouched beside one of the fallen men. Her eyes, once fierce with the determination of battle, softened as they traced the scars that marred his rugged face, a map of past transgressions and hard-won battles. In that moment, she recognized that each mark was a story, a testament to a life steeped in violence and survival. A quiet melancholy passed over her as she realized that this confrontation, however unexpected, was not merely an isolated incident. It was a harbinger, a clue that the forces she once fought against were coalescing in ways that threatened the delicate balance of her newfound existence. The subtle figure who had spoken those fateful words, "I never thought our paths would cross again," remained in her peripheral vision as he struggled to regain his footing. Elena's eyes met his again, and in that silent exchange, 1,000 unspoken questions swirled between them. Who was he really? And what unfinished business lingered from the depths of a past that she had so long tried to bury beneath the calm exterior of a yoga instructor? Before she could extract an answer, he was helped to his feet by one of his cohorts. His gaze lingered on her, a mix of regret, defiance, and an unsettling familiarity, before he melted back into the shifting darkness. The biker leader, who had silently observed the entire skirmish from the sidelines, now rode forward with deliberate caution. He dismounted beside Elena, his expression a complex tapestry of admiration, concern, and a grudging acknowledgement of the power that lay within her. "I've never seen anything like that," he murmured, his tone low and reverent. You moved with the precision of a warrior who's seen too much to be fooled by appearances." His words, sincere and tinged with an emotion he had rarely allowed himself to feel, hung in the night air. Elena offered him a measured smile, one that was equal parts gratitude and melancholy, as she carefully surveyed the scene. "Sometimes," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper yet carrying the weight of her countless memories, "the past finds a way of catching up to us. And sometimes, it's our only guide through the chaos of the present." Her eyes, reflecting both the inner calm of a yogi and the hardened determination of a former Special Forces operative, met his with an intensity that spoke of shared understandings and unspoken alliances. With the immediate danger now subdued, Elena methodically gathered the remnants of the night's disturbance. Each fallen assailant was a reminder of the delicate balance between light and darkness, a balance that had been so carefully maintained in her studio, but now threatened to spill over into the wider world. In the quiet that followed, as the biker gang began to regroup and assist where they could, Elena's thoughts turned to the broader implications of what had just transpired. This was no random act of violence. It was a calculated move by forces that had known her history, forces that now sought to test the limits of her resolve. In the flickering luminescence of the streetlights, as the first hints of a post-midnight chill seeped into the bones of the old industrial district, Elena took a moment to center herself. She found a quiet alcove behind the warehouse and sat down on a cool, rough slab of concrete. There, in the solitude punctuated only by the distant hum of returning motorcycles and the whispered rustle of wind through dead leaves, she closed her eyes and began to breathe deeply. Each exhale was a silent invocation of inner peace, a ritual that allowed her to sift through the adrenaline and shock, isolating the threads of insight hidden within the chaos. As memories and reflections intertwined, Elena's mind drifted back to those long-ago nights when she had served in the elite forces, nights marked by loss, camaraderie, and the relentless pursuit of duty in a world that valued strength above all else. In those moments she had learned that every conflict, every battle, left scars not just on the body but deep within the soul. Now, standing at the crossroads between that turbulent past and a future she hoped to reclaim through the healing power of compassion, she recognized that the confrontation at the North Gate was but the opening salvo in a war that was far from over. The biker leader's presence broke her reverie as he approached silently. "We need to get you back," he said, his tone gentle yet pragmatic. "I can't promise you safety here for long, not if they're planning something bigger." Elena nodded, rising to her feet with a grace that belied the toll of the recent skirmish. "There is more at stake than just tonight," she replied, her voice firm and laced with quiet urgency. "Someone is orchestrating this, pulling the strings from the shadows. And if I'm to understand why they've come for me, I must follow the trail." Her words hung heavy in the crisp night air, a promise of an unfolding mystery that reached back into the depths of her secret past. In the soft glow of the approaching dawn, Elena and the biker leader, flanked by a few members of his gang, mounted their motorcycles and set off down the desolate road. The journey was marked by a heavy silence punctuated only by the rhythmic thrum of engines and the measured cadence of Elena's reflective breaths. As they rode, the landscape shifted from the battered industrial remnants of the North Gate to more pastoral scenes, the rolling hills and open fields that lay on the outskirts of town, bathed in the muted light of early morning. It was a stark reminder that beauty and brutality often existed side by side. The biker leader rode beside Elena, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, yet his thoughts seemingly adrift in the complexities of the night's events. "I've heard whispers, you know," he confided quietly as they cruised along a winding road bordered by groves of ancient trees. "There's talk of an organization that's been active in the shadows for years, one that deals in secrets and silences. They've been linked to incidents like what you encountered tonight." His words were soft, as if spoken in a tone meant only for the space between them. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly as she absorbed his information, a seed of realization beginning to take root. Her past, it seemed, was not as buried as she had hoped. The ride was long and reflective. With each passing mile, Elena felt the weight of the night's revelation settle upon her shoulders. The bikers, ever silent and watchful, formed a protective circle around her as they navigated winding country roads. In the cool pre-dawn darkness, she allowed herself a few moments of introspection, flashes of memories from a time when every step was a calculated risk, when trust was a commodity as rare as peace. She recalled the rigorous training, the sacrifices, and the unyielding discipline that had once defined her existence. Now, that same inner fire flickered within her, tempered by years of meditation and the quest for redemption. The collision of these dual identities, the fierce warrior and the gentle yogi, created a tension that was as potent as it was enlightening. When at last the horizon began to lighten with the promise of dawn, they arrived at a small, abandoned rest stop on the edge of town. There, beneath the shelter of a dilapidated overpass, Elena dismounted and surveyed the area. The fresh chill of morning mingled with the lingering adrenaline of the night's battle. As she looked out over the quiet expanse, her mind churned with questions. Who had sent those mercenaries? What was the connection between that mysterious man and her past? And what grand design lay hidden behind these orchestrated acts of violence? For a long moment, silence reigned as she contemplated the path ahead. The biker leader approached, his expression somber. "We might be dealing with a force that's been planning this for a long time. Something, or someone, that knows more about your past than anyone else does." His words, though delivered in a low, reflective tone, stirred something deep within her, a cautious alertness mingled with the resolve of a woman who had long since learned that peace was rarely achieved without sacrifice. As the sun fully emerged over the horizon, bathing the world in a hopeful glow, Elena felt a renewed determination. The road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, yet it also promised revelations that could reshape her understanding of both her past and her future. With the biker gang as her reluctant allies, she resolved that she would not run from the shadows that clung to her history. Instead, she would face them head-on, embracing the full spectrum of her identity, the tranquil yogi and the indomitable warrior. In that quiet, breaking dawn, the journey resumed. Elena mounted her bicycle, the gentle hum of its wheels on the old pavement a counterpoint to the heavy questions that filled her mind. Every mile carried her closer to the heart of the mystery, a mystery that had long been obscured by layers of secrecy and time. The alliance with the bikers, forged in the crucible of conflict, was now both a shield and a beacon, guiding her toward answers that would inevitably reshape the contours of her life. As the morning advanced, Elena's thoughts turned to the future, a future where the ghosts of her past might be exorcised not by denial, but by confrontation and understanding. The rhythmic cadence of the road, the steady companionship of the biker leader, and the resolute determination burning in her heart melded together into a singular purpose. The confrontation at the North Gate was merely the opening act in a long, unfolding drama, a drama that promised both peril and the possibility of redemption. And so, as the day broke in earnest over the quiet countryside, Elena pressed onward. Each breath she drew was a quiet affirmation of her commitment to unearthing the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the threats that lurked in the shadows were as enigmatic as they were dangerous. Yet in that moment, enveloped by the gentle light of dawn and the steadfast loyalty of her unlikely companions, she knew one thing with unwavering clarity: her past, with all its scars and secrets, was an inseparable part of the person she had become, and it was a legacy that she would confront with both compassion and unyielding strength. The promise of the new day mingled with the bittersweet memories of the night's ordeal, creating a tapestry of light and shadow that perfectly encapsulated Elena's dual existence. In that delicate balance, between the healing grace of yoga and the relentless precision of her former military life, lay the hope that even the most turbulent storms could eventually give way to a calm, enduring peace. Yet, as she rode onward with her newfound allies and the questions of the night echoing in her mind, the truth remained clear. The battle was only just beginning, and the path to understanding was paved with challenges that would test every facet of her being. As the wheels of the motorcycles carried Elena and her unlikely companions further from the familiar contours of Crestwood, the landscape began to transform. The well-traveled country road gave way to a labyrinth of narrow, gravelly lanes flanked by dense clusters of gnarled trees and abandoned fields. The sky overhead, still a soft wash of dawn's early light, hinted at the hidden secrets of a world in flux. In the back of her mind, the events of the night at the North Gate, the sudden ambush, the echo of past battles, remained vivid, each memory a stark reminder that her quest for peace was now inextricably linked to a dangerous undercurrent of forces from her former life. After several hours of tense silence punctuated only by the steady thrum of engines, and the rhythmic pulse of her own measured breathing, the convoy arrived at a secluded clearing. Nestled amid a copse of ancient oaks was a weather-beaten farmhouse that had long served as a clandestine rendezvous point for the biker gang. Its faded red paint and creaking wooden floors bore the scars of countless nights spent in both reverie and vigilant watchfulness. It was here that the leader of the gang, a man whose eyes now carried not only a hardened resolve but also a spark of genuine concern, guided Elena to a temporary haven from the relentless road. Under the sagging eaves of the farmhouse's porch, the group gathered in a loose circle. A few of the bikers dismounted, their leather jackets creaking softly as they exchanged low, urgent whispers. The leader, his face etched with the lines of past battles and recent uncertainties, turned to Elena. "We've got contacts in these parts," he explained quietly, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic gravity. "People who've been following whispers and shadows for a long time. They might help piece together who's orchestrating these attacks, and why they seem so fixated on you." Elena regarded him with measured curiosity. Every word resonated with the weight of her past, a time when information was currency and every secret could mean the difference between survival and destruction. "And you believe they can help me understand this?" she asked, her tone a blend of skepticism and cautious hope. There was a subtle vulnerability in her inquiry, a glimpse of the woman who had once yearned to bury her violent history beneath the calm of a yoga studio. The leader's eyes softened for a fraction of a second before hardening once more with resolve. "I've seen what your skills can do. Tonight I witnessed a spark of that old fire in you, one that even we couldn't ignore. There are forces at work that have known your name long before you found solace in peaceful practices. I believe the answers lie with someone from your past, a contact who's been off the grid but never truly forgotten the art of covert operations." At those words, a palpable tension rippled through the small assembly. As the others exchanged wary glances, Elena's mind reeled back to long-dormant memories. She recalled days when orders were given in hushed tones, when loyalty was forged in the crucible of shared danger, and when every encounter carried the potential for betrayal. That part of her, the fierce operative who had navigated the darkest corridors of power, had been tucked away under layers of mindfulness and gentle practice. Yet now, in the face of a threat that respected neither peace nor secrecy, it stirred, unwilling to be ignored. The leader motioned toward a creaking door that led into the farmhouse's main room. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and faint traces of tobacco, a reminder that this refuge had been witness to many clandestine meetings over the years. Elena stepped inside, her senses immediately alert to the subtle interplay of light and shadow cast by a single, swinging lamp overhead. In the dim interior, a long, scarred table dominated the space, its surface bearing marks of past conflicts and hasty sketches of plans that had once altered destinies. A lean, grizzled man sat in a corner, his eyes as sharp as broken glass despite the years etched into his face. He was known simply as Hawk, a moniker earned during operations where failure was not an option. His presence, at once intimidating and oddly reassuring, lent an air of gravitas to the gathering. The biker leader introduced him with a nod. "Hawk, this is Elena. She's not who she seems, and you know how dangerous that can be." Hawk's gaze, dark and unyielding, locked onto Elena's. In his eyes, she saw echoes of a shared past that was as murky as it was undeniable. Hawk spoke in a low, deliberate tone. "Elena, it's been a long time. I heard rumors of your transition, of your attempts to leave the battlefield behind. But it appears fate has other plans." His words were neither reproachful nor welcoming. They carried only the unvarnished truth of someone who had navigated similar crossroads. For a moment, silence fell heavy over the room as Elena's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and reluctant recognition. "I never sought to hide who I was," she replied softly, her voice steady even as memories of explosive firefights and covert operations surged beneath her skin. "But there came a time when I had to choose between the relentless pursuit of conflict and the quiet promise of redemption. I thought I'd left that life behind." Her eyes, now filled with the weight of 1,000 silent battles, met Hawk's unflinching stare. "Yet, it seems the past is not so easily dismissed." Hawk leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped around the edge of the table as if drawing strength from the scars of history. "There's a name that has resurfaced, a ghost from our shared days in the field. They call him the Requiem. No one knows his true identity, but the mark of his operations is unmistakable. Rumors suggest that he's been orchestrating covert strikes, manipulating events from behind the veil of legitimacy. And it appears his sights have turned toward you, Elena. Your skills, your history, they're of great interest to him." A chill that was not entirely due to the cool draft of the farmhouse swept over her. The name, the Requiem, reverberated through her memory, a symbol of the finality of betrayal and the grim certainty of reckoning. In the covert circles where Elena had once moved, names were currency, and the mere mention of one could send shockwaves through the ranks. She recalled whispers from those days, a shadowy figure whose interventions had rewritten the rules of engagement, whose methods were as precise as they were merciless. The conversation grew more intense as Hawk outlined a series of incidents, subtle disruptions in communication lines, intercepted transmissions hinting at a conspiracy, and the unsettling notion that the Requiem's network was far more extensive than anyone had suspected. Each revelation painted a picture of an enemy who was not only methodical but also deeply personal, a nemesis who seemed to derive a twisted satisfaction from unsettling those who dared to leave the world of conflict behind. Outside, the low murmur of voices and the distant clatter of motorcycle parts provided a reminder of the precarious balance between sanctuary and the outside world. Elena's mind raced as she tried to reconcile the peaceful life she had painstakingly built with the insidious tendrils of her past that now threatened to unravel it. Every instinct, honed by years of survival and introspection, warned her that the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Hawk continued, his tone unwavering. "The Requiem has a knack for turning allies into adversaries. He's been known to infiltrate groups, sow mistrust, and then strike when the division is at its peak. I suspect that the recent disturbances, and even the appearance of your adversaries at the North Gate, are calculated moves designed to test your vulnerabilities. To see if you're still the operative you once were, or if you've allowed the gentle world of yoga to render you soft and unresponsive. His words cut through the air like a blade, leaving no room for ambiguity. The weight of his assessment was not lost on Elena. In the solitude of her own reflections during long, silent nights at the studio, she had wrestled with the duality of her nature. There were times when the disciplined serenity of yoga clashed violently with the relentless drive of a warrior who had once been trained to trust no one. Now, faced with a foe who exploited that very duality, she felt a stirring of both fear and determination. For hours, the discussion unfolded in a charged atmosphere of half-whispered theories and guarded recollections. The bikers, once mere silent sentinels on the outskirts of the narrative, now became active participants, sharing tidbits of intelligence gleaned from their own contacts and roadside encounters. One of them, a younger man with the nickname Razor, painted across his forearm, mentioned that a courier had delivered an unmarked envelope to one of his associates, a note bearing a symbol that resembled an ancient insignia from Elena's past. The implication was clear. The Requiem was not content with subtle provocations. He was sending messages that demanded attention. Elena's thoughts whirled as she absorbed every detail. The envelope, the clandestine meetings, the subtle interplay of loyalty and betrayal, all of it coalesced into a picture that was both foreboding and oddly familiar. The enemy was not simply an abstract threat. He was a mirror reflecting the deepest, most unresolved parts of her history. In that moment she realized that her journey was not merely about surviving external attacks, but about reconciling with the fragmented pieces of her own identity. The dichotomy of the gentle yogi and the relentless warrior was not a burden to discard but a duality to master. Taking a deep, measured breath, Elena rose from the table. "I need to know more," she said, her voice resonating with a mix of vulnerability and steeled resolve. "I cannot allow this past to define me, but I also cannot let it haunt me unchecked. If the Requiem seeks to exploit the remnants of who I once was, then I must confront him, and whatever ghosts he has awakened." A hush fell over the room as the gravity of her declaration sank in. The biker leader's eyes shone with an intensity that spoke of both admiration and forewarning. "Then we'll help you, Elena," he vowed. "We're not just your protectors on the road, we're your allies in this fight. But you must be prepared for a journey that will take you into the darkest recesses of your own past, and possibly force you to confront truths you've long tried to bury." For a long, silent moment, Elena allowed herself to be enveloped by the weight of that promise. In the flickering light of the farmhouse's interior, surrounded by figures who had once seemed so foreign yet now resonated with an unspoken camaraderie, she felt both the chill of impending danger and the warmth of an unexpected alliance. Outside, the rising sun cast long shadows across the land, a visual reminder that every new day carried within it the possibility of both renewal and peril. Gathering her resolve, she stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The farmhouse, with its tired facade and echoing memories, had served as a temporary haven, but the path ahead lay in unraveling the tangled web of alliances and betrayals. The journey would lead her deeper into territories she once thought she had left behind, into realms where every face held a secret and every whisper might be the harbinger of a new threat. The symbol on that envelope, the shadow of the Requiem, and the murmur of old contacts hinted at a long-forgotten network that still pulsed beneath the surface of modern life. As Elena mounted her bicycle once more, accompanied by the steadfast presence of the biker leader and his loyal crew, she felt the dual call of destiny and duty. With the wind brushing against her face and the open road stretching before her, the conflicting parts of her identity, warrior and healer, began to merge into a singular, formidable force. She realized that the next leg of her journey was not just about survival, but about reclaiming the narrative of her own life, a narrative that would weave together the threads of past glories, present challenges, and the uncertain promise of a future where she could finally embrace both the light and the shadow within. With every rotation of the wheels and every determined breath, Elena advanced into a future fraught with danger and possibility. The highway before her was not merely a route to an unknown destination, it was a threshold into a world where old allegiances would be tested, secrets would be revealed, and the ultimate confrontation with the Requiem was inevitable. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, its rays illuminating the path ahead, Elena steeled herself for the trials to come, knowing that every step, every encounter, was leading her closer to an understanding of who she truly was, and what she must become. The convoy's wheels spun steadily along a stretch of forgotten highway, where the early light of day struggled to banish the lingering shadows of night. After leaving the safety of the farmhouse, Elena found herself surrounded by a profound silence broken only by the soft rumble of engines and the rhythmic hum of the wind. Every rotation of the tire on the rough asphalt seemed to echo the weight of a past that was refusing to be left behind. The biker leader rode close beside her, his unwavering gaze fixed on the horizon as if he, too, was searching for the hidden threads that tied their fates together. As the road narrowed into a ribbon of solitude, the landscape morphed into a patchwork of barren fields and crumbling relics of forgotten industry. Abandoned warehouses and rusted factories punctuated the countryside, a silent reminder of an era when life moved with a harsher, more relentless pace. Here, among these ghostly vestiges of the past, Elena sensed that every dilapidated structure held secrets, much like the recesses of her own heart. With each mile that passed, memories long suppressed began to stir, moments of high-stakes missions in unforgiving terrains, of nights spent in hostile territories where survival was a daily prayer. The biker leader broke the silence as they approached a weathered overpass draped in ivy and the scars of time. "There's a safe house not far from here," he said, his voice low and measured. "A place where old contacts can offer more information. It won't be easy to find, but the clues you need might be hidden there." His words resonated with an unspoken urgency, a promise that answers, however elusive, awaited them in the remnants of a world that had once been steeped in covert operations. Elena's mind raced as she contemplated the path ahead. The safe house, if it indeed held the key to understanding the Requiem's network, might also force her to confront the ghosts of her former life head-on. She recalled the blurred lines of loyalty and betrayal that had defined her years in the Special Forces, where every alliance was a fragile construct, and trust was a luxury few could afford. The internal battle raged quietly within her, the desire to reclaim a semblance of the peaceful existence she nurtured in her yoga studio clashed with the instinctive drive to harness every ounce of her lethal training. It was a conflict that had defined her identity for years, an ongoing dance between serenity and savagery. Arriving at the overpass, they dismounted and made their way through a tangle of overgrown weeds and shattered glass. The structure, once a proud symbol of industry, now resembled a mausoleum of memories, its corridors echoing with the faint whispers of what once was. Elena led the group through dimly lit passageways, her senses heightened as she scanned every shadow for signs of danger. The safe house had been abandoned for years, its interior now a chaotic mosaic of peeling paint, scattered debris, and relics of a bygone era. Inside one of the larger rooms, where light filtered in through broken windows casting fractured patterns on the floor, they discovered a cache of dusty documents and faded photographs. Each scrap of paper was a puzzle piece, a fragment of a larger picture that connected Elena's past to the current threat. With a delicate reverence born of both curiosity and caution, Elena bent down to examine an old ledger filled with handwritten notes and cryptic symbols. Her trained eyes immediately recognized one of the insignia as a variation of an emblem she had seen during her covert days, a symbol now tied to the Requiem. Every line and curve in the worn ink was like a thread pulling her back into a world she had tried so desperately to forget. As she carefully pieced together the clues, a sudden creak from the corridor jolted her from her reverie. The biker leader signaled silently, and the group tensed, hands moving instinctively toward concealed weapons. Elena's heart pounded with a blend of anticipation and dread, the memories of ambushes past merging with the current uncertainty of the moment. The door to the safe house swung open slowly, and a sliver of cold light spilled into the room. Silhouetted against the dim background stood a figure draped in a long, dark coat, an unexpected visitor whose presence sent a ripple of recognition through Elena's core. The newcomer's gait was deliberate, each step echoing the precision of someone who had long mastered the art of stealth. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, yet his eyes burned with an intensity that Elena recognized all too well, a look that once belonged to an ally turned adversary. For a long, suspended moment, time seemed to halt as their eyes locked. There was an unspoken conversation in that silent exchange, a melding of shared history and bitter regret. "Surprised to see you here, Elena," the stranger said in a low, measured tone, the words carrying both familiarity and an edge of hostility. His voice stirred memories of clandestine meetings in far-off lands, of missions that had once bound them together in brotherhood and now seemed to tear at the fabric of trust. "I've been following the threads, and it appears that the Requiem's web is spreading faster than anyone anticipated." The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. The biker leader's grip tightened on his handlebar-mounted pistol, and Elena instinctively moved a step closer, her eyes never leaving the stranger's. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice a blend of caution and barely concealed anger. "And why have you come now?" The stranger hesitated, his gaze flickering between the gathered group before settling once more on Elena. "You know me too well," he replied cryptically. "I am but a messenger, a remnant of the past you once thought was buried. The Requiem has long been a ghost in our midst, and I've been sent to warn you. There are forces moving in the dark, forces that seek to exploit your history for their own gain. You have always been the key, whether you wish to accept it or not." A heavy silence descended upon the room as his words sank in. Elena's mind reeled with the implications. The name, the Requiem, was not merely a specter from her past, it was now an active force, orchestrating a campaign that threatened to unravel the fragile threads of her new life. The stranger's warning was both a call to arms and a challenge, an invitation to once again step into the fray of danger that she had worked so hard to leave behind. With a measured breath, Elena straightened, her eyes hardening with a determination that belied the turmoil churning within. "I have spent years seeking peace," she said, her voice resolute yet laced with sorrow. "I chose this path to heal the wounds of my past. But if my history is what you claim it is, a weapon to be used against me, then I will no longer hide. I will confront every shadow until I reclaim my destiny." Her declaration seemed to ignite a quiet fire in the room. The stranger's face softened, if only slightly, as he regarded her with an expression that mingled regret and respect. "Then know this," he said slowly, each word deliberate and weighted. "The Requiem is not merely an enemy from the past. He is a force that seeks to control the narrative, to twist loyalty and betrayal into a weapon. Every step you take from here on out will be a battle for the truth, and for your very soul." The tension in the safe house escalated as the group absorbed his words. Outside, the wind began to howl, as if mourning the loss of innocence and heralding the oncoming storm of conflict. The documents scattered across the table now formed a tapestry of clues, each one a vital piece of a puzzle that spanned continents and decades. Elena's fingers trembled slightly as she held a fragile, yellowed letter bearing a cryptic message. The ink had faded with time, yet its meaning was clear, a warning, a plea, and a challenge all wrapped into one. For hours, the small assembly pored over the evidence, piecing together fragments of intelligence that revealed a network of espionage, betrayal, and covert manipulation. The stranger, whose presence remained enigmatic, provided additional insights into the workings of the Requiem's organization. He spoke of clandestine meetings in abandoned warehouses, coded transmissions intercepted by rogue agents, and a series of orchestrated events that had gradually drawn a web of influence around Elena's life. As the day wore on, the safe house transformed into a temporary war room, a space where past and present collided, and where the quest for truth demanded sacrifices both physical and emotional. Elena found herself at the center of this unfolding drama, her dual identities merging into a singular force. The gentle yoga instructor and the hardened operative were no longer separate. They were intertwined strands of a resilient spirit that refused to be broken. In a quiet moment amid the flurry of whispered plans and meticulous notes, Elena retreated to a small corner of the safe house. There, in the dim light filtered through a cracked window, she allowed herself a brief reprieve to confront the torrent of memories and emotions that surged within her. Each breath became a meditation, a practice that once brought her solace, and now fortified her resolve. The faces of fallen comrades, the weight of decisions made in the heat of battle, and the hope for redemption mingled in her mind like the intricate patterns of a mandala. In that reflective solitude, she realized that the path before her was not one of simple confrontation, but of transformation. The wounds of the past could be healed not by denial, but by embracing every fragment of her history and forging them into a shield against the encroaching darkness. Returning to the group with renewed purpose, Elena addressed everyone with a calm yet fierce conviction. "We have the pieces," she said, her voice resonating with both authority and empathy. "Now we must weave them together. The Requiem's hold on our pasts may be strong, but it is not unbreakable. I will confront him, not just to protect my present, but to reclaim the truth of who I was meant to be." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled allies. The biker leader stepped forward, his expression resolute. "We ride with you, Elena," he declared. "The road ahead is treacherous, and the enemy is both within and without. But together, we can break these chains." His words were not merely a pledge of protection, they were an affirmation of a shared commitment to a cause that transcended old loyalties and new alliances. The stranger, his face now softened by an understanding born of shared pain, nodded slowly. "Your path will not be an easy one," he warned. "Every step you take will be shadowed by those who wish to see you fall. But remember, every scar, every battle, is a testament to your strength. Embrace them, for they are the marks of a warrior reborn." With the new intelligence mapped out on a makeshift board, the group began to strategize their next move. The safe house, once a quiet refuge, now pulsed with the electric energy of imminent conflict. Elena's mind churned with plans, scenarios, and contingencies. She knew that the confrontation with the Requiem was inevitable, that the dark tendrils of his influence would soon emerge from the shadows to challenge her resolve. Yet, in that crucible of uncertainty, she found an unexpected serenity, a clarity born of acceptance, and the unyielding drive to forge her destiny on her own terms. As dusk began to settle over the abandoned compound, casting long, spectral shadows through broken windows, Elena gathered her allies for one final briefing. "Tonight we rest and prepare," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of a solitary lantern. "Tomorrow, we follow the trail further. The road to the Requiem's heart is fraught with peril, but it is the only path to reclaiming the truth." Her words, laced with both determination and a quiet melancholy, resonated deeply with everyone present. In that quiet moment, as the safe house settled into an uneasy stillness, Elena's thoughts drifted to the journey that had brought her here, a journey marked by both triumph and tragedy. The duality of her existence, the merging of the compassionate healer and the relentless warrior, was not a burden but a beacon, illuminating the path forward through even the darkest of nights. And as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, Elena silently vowed that she would confront every shadow, embrace every scar, and above all, reclaim the narrative of her life from those who sought to rewrite it. The night deepened, and in the soft, reflective darkness of that abandoned safe house, a fragile hope was kindled. It was a hope built not on the promise of escape, but on the resolve to face one's past head-on, to transform pain into strength, and to forge alliances in the crucible of adversity. Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment of meditation, a silent prayer to the universe that every step she took would lead her closer to the truth, to redemption, and ultimately, to the liberation of her soul. Under the cover of pre-dawn gloom, the group departed from the temporary refuge of the safe house. Elena led the convoy of motorcycles along narrow, winding backroads that cut through a landscape scarred by time. Every mile intensified the weight of the revelations from the previous meeting, the whispered warnings, the cryptic references to a shadowy enemy, and the knowledge that every step they took was being watched. The destination, as pieced together from battered files and coded messages, was a derelict industrial complex. This abandoned factory, once a symbol of industrial might, now stood as a dark repository of secrets. Its rusted metal and broken windows harbored evidence that could unravel the Requiem's far-reaching network. The journey itself was a study in silent tension. The biker gang rode in tight formation, engines rumbling in unison as they navigated the labyrinth of country lanes. The biker leader's expression remained stoic, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon ahead, while Hawk pored over faded documents in the dim glow of his handheld lamp. Elena's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, flashes of her past covert operations, nights spent in hostile territories, moments when split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, mingled with the quiet determination born from years of healing through yoga. With every rotation of the wheels, she felt the duality of her nature intensify, the gentle yogi striving for peace and the lethal operative whose instincts never truly died. At last, the convoy reached the outskirts of the sprawling, abandoned factory complex. The imposing structure loomed like a ghost of forgotten industry, its once proud facade now pitted and crumbling, overtaken by creeping vines and layers of dust. Faint security lights blinked sporadically along its perimeter, hinting at recent, covert activity. Elena's experienced eyes swept over the area. There, among scattered tire tracks and footprints hastily covered by nature's reclaiming hand, she detected signs of human presence. This was a place where the Requiem's men felt safe, a stronghold for those who dealt in secrets and subterfuge. In hushed tones, the small group quickly devised a plan. Elena's role was unequivocal: lead a stealth team into the compound, secure any records or devices that might expose the clandestine operations, and, if necessary, capture a messenger who could unravel more of the mystery. "Move quietly," she instructed, her voice low but imbued with quiet authority. "We're here to gather intelligence. We cannot afford to trigger an alarm." Her words were measured and precise, echoing the countless covert operations she'd once executed under far more dangerous circumstances. Under the dark veil of night, Elena and her most trusted allies, Hawk, the biker leader, and two younger members of the gang, slipped away from the safety of the motorcycles. They advanced along a narrow alley adjacent to the complex's rear entrance. Shadows became their allies as they pressed close to crumbling walls and discarded debris. A brief pause allowed them to assess the situation. Two patrolling guards moved with deliberate slowness, their flashlights sweeping the area with unthinking regularity. Elena raised a hand in silent command, and the group melded into the darkness, slipping past the patrol with the silent grace of experienced operatives. Inside, the compound was an oppressive maze of corridors, echoing with the groans of aging metal and the distant hum of generators. The air was thick with the scent of decay, oil, and dust, a tangible reminder that time here had stalled. Elena led her team down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. Every footstep on the cracked concrete reverberated like a warning. Her thoughts turned inward as she recalled past missions, clandestine infiltrations where every sound could mean danger and every shadow could conceal an enemy. The memories, though long buried beneath the calm exterior of her yoga practice, now surged with the immediacy of a battlefield. After what seemed an eternity of measured, cautious movement, they reached a heavy steel door emblazoned with faded letters. Behind it lay a room that, according to the scant clues on their battered intel board, was the nerve center of the operation. Elena carefully placed her hand on the cold metal. With practiced precision, she produced a lockpick set from the inner pocket of her jacket, a tool as familiar now as a pen had once been during her covert days. With a soft click, the lock yielded and the door creaked open, revealing a cluttered control room filled with outdated computers, heaps of paper files, and electronic devices that blinked and hummed in an eerie, intermittent pattern. It was a paradoxical repository of the old and new, a digital graveyard where the records of clandestine meetings and covert arms deals lay hidden among relics of a bygone era. Elena's eyes scanned the chaos. On a battered desk lay folders marked with cryptic symbols, one of which was unmistakably the emblem of the Requiem. She quickly gathered several files and connected a USB drive to one of the antiquated computers. As lines of coded text and encrypted data began to appear on the screen, her heart pounded with anticipation. Each byte of data was a clue, a thread that, when woven together, could expose the vast web of covert operations and betrayal stretching across continents. She worked with the precision of a seasoned operative, her fingers dancing over the keys as she extracted and stored every piece of incriminating information. Then, A subtle noise behind her shattered the fragile silence. Elena's head snapped up, her senses instantly alert. From the shadowed recess of the control room emerged a lone figure, a man cloaked in darkness, his features obscured by the deep hood of his coat. His slow, deliberate approach was an unmistakable sign of someone who knew how to move unseen. In one fluid motion, Elena was on her feet, her hand moving to her concealed sidearm. The intruder paused, startled by her swift reaction, and a tense standoff ensued. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to slow. The man's eyes flickered in the dim light as he assessed the situation, and then his voice, low and rough, broke the silence. "I didn't expect you to be so efficient," he muttered, a trace of grudging respect threading through his tone. "Who sent you?" Elena's gaze hardened as she demanded. "Answer me, who sent you?" The intruder's eyes darted nervously. "I'm just a courier," he stammered. "I was sent to deliver a message. It wasn't meant for you to find out this soon." His words were vague, but the urgency in his tone spoke volumes about the danger that lurked beyond mere words. Before he could offer more, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Recognizing that reinforcements were imminent, Elena made a split-second decision. "Take him with us," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "He might hold the key to understanding why the Requiem is so intent on dredging up my past." With practiced efficiency, one of her teammates bound the courier with a length of rope while another stood guard by the door. With the immediate threat temporarily neutralized, Elena returned to the computer. Her eyes raced over the incoming data, each file, each line of code, painting a picture of an expansive conspiracy. The records detailed arms deals, secret meetings with shadowy officials, and even plans for an operation that threatened to destabilize a politically volatile region. More disturbing were the references to an imminent, clandestine gathering. The inner circle of the Requiem was set to convene in just a few days. The realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. The Requiem was preparing for a move that could have catastrophic consequences, and she was inextricably linked to it by a past she could no longer hide. The implications were staggering. Each piece of evidence was not just proof of covert machinations but also a personal indictment, a reminder that the life she had sought to leave behind was now clawing its way back into her present. The courier, his eyes now wide with fear and defiance, was her living link to this shadowy network. "What is your message?" she demanded once more, pressing the question as if it were the only key to unlocking the enemy's plot. The bound courier hesitated, his breath shaky in the tense silence. "The Requiem, he wants you to remember," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Remember what you were, and what you lost." His words, cryptic and laden with implication, sent a shiver down Elena's spine. Was he referring to the old alliances of her covert past? Or did he hint at a betrayal so profound that it had long haunted her dreams? Before more could be said, the sound of heavy footsteps and urgent voices from the corridor signaled that the compound's defenders were closing in. "We need to get out, now!" The biker leader's voice crackled over the comms. With the files hastily secured and the USB drive safely stowed, Elena signaled to her team that it was time to exfiltrate. The exit was fraught with danger now, as reinforcements converged on the control room. Every step back through the corridor was laden with the threat of discovery. The team moved as one, a tightly choreographed dance of stealth and precision honed over years of covert operations. Bursting out into the cool, uncertain night, the group reassembled in a narrow alley beyond the factory's crumbling walls. The biker leader scanned the perimeter with eyes that missed nothing, while Elena allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. The intelligence they'd salvaged, the meticulously extracted data, the damning documents, and the courier's cryptic words, was a beacon in the darkness. It spoke of an enemy with vast resources and even greater malice, one who would stop at nothing to manipulate the past and control the future. Standing beneath a tapestry of stars, Elena's gaze hardened with resolve. Every file, every coded message, was now a part of the larger narrative she was determined to rewrite. The ghosts of her past, both the quiet meditations of her present and the relentless memories of covert operations, merged into a single, indomitable purpose. With the courier bound at her side as a reluctant emissary of secrets, and with the steadfast loyalty of her biker allies behind her, she silently vowed that she would expose the Requiem's network, confront the betrayal that haunted her, and reclaim the truth of who she was meant to be. As the group dispersed into the night to plan their next move, Elena lingered a moment longer, her heart heavy with the burden of what lay ahead. The digital files she carried were not mere evidence. They were the clarion call of a war that spanned decades. A war that pitted the light of truth against the deep shadows of deception. With the enemy's clock ticking inexorably, she prepared herself for the long, perilous road to the confrontation that would soon define her destiny. Night had fallen in a cascade of inky darkness punctuated by scattered neon glows from a ruined industrial district, the very heart of the enemy's stronghold. In this forsaken quarter, time itself seemed to have halted. Decrepit warehouses and abandoned service stations loomed like silent sentinels over cracked asphalt, their broken windows reflecting the spectral light of a half-moon. Elena's convoy of motorcycles now gathered at the edge of a derelict compound, its iron gates twisted and rusted from decades of neglect. Every detail of the scene evoked memories of a past both haunting and familiar, a past that Elena had long fought to escape yet now found herself inexorably drawn back into. Stepping off her bike with deliberate caution, Elena's eyes swept over the compound with the unwavering focus of a seasoned operative. The data she had extracted from the industrial complex earlier had led her here. Every cryptic file and every faded symbol pointed to a hidden meeting space deep within this labyrinth of decay, where the Requiem awaited. The weight of the evidence, the encrypted transmissions, the whispered warnings of the courier, and the damning records of covert arms deals, pressed upon her like an unyielding burden. This was no ordinary enemy. The Requiem was a ghost from her former life, a man whose name had become synonymous with betrayal and ruthlessness. Her biker allies fanned out around the perimeter, their expressions taut with anticipation. The biker leader, whose unwavering loyalty had been a beacon of support since the first uneasy encounter, motioned silently for the group to advance. Together, they navigated a maze of shattered corridors and overgrown pathways that led to the compound's inner sanctum. Elena's heart pounded in her ears as memories of clandestine operations flooded her mind, the adrenaline of high-stakes missions, the razor-thin margins between life and death, and the bitter taste of betrayals that had once left scars not only on her body but on her very soul. Inside the compound, the air was dense with the mingling of damp decay and the faint trace of industrial chemicals. Flickering fluorescent lights cast erratic shadows across walls lined with peeling posters and cryptic graffiti, symbols that echoed the very insignia now emblazoned on the dossier she carried. The corridors were silent except for the soft scuff of boots and the low murmur of whispered commands. Every step brought Elena closer to the final confrontation with the architect of her nightmares. At the end of a long, narrow hall, they came upon a heavy, reinforced door. Its surface was scarred by bullet holes and the passage of time. Elena exchanged a brief, determined glance with the biker leader before signaling her team to halt. With steady, measured hands, she produced a compact device, a relic from her Special Forces days that functioned as both a digital key and a signal jammer. The device buzzed softly as it interfaced with the lock, bypassing layers of security protocols with an efficiency born of years of training. After a tense minute that stretched like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing a cavernous room shrouded in oppressive gloom. Within that space, illuminated only by the erratic pulse of a single overhead light, stood the Requiem. His presence was as magnetic as it was menacing, a figure draped in a long, dark coat that concealed much of his form, his face half hidden by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, cold and calculating, glinted in the dim light as he regarded Elena with a mixture of derision and something that resembled regret. The silence that fell was heavy, laden with years of hidden conflict and unspoken words. "Elena," he intoned slowly, his voice both familiar and alien, resonating in the still air. "I wondered if fate would finally force our paths to cross again." His tone was measured, each syllable carrying the weight of old alliances and bitter betrayals. For a moment, time seemed to compress. The years of covert operations, the lost friendships, the long nights of solitary training, all converged into this singular, fateful instant. Elena's gaze remained unflinching as she stepped forward into the pool of harsh light. "Your message was clear," she replied, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions raging beneath her calm exterior. "You wanted me to remember what I once was, what I lost. But I refuse to be defined by the ghosts of my past." The words, simple yet laden with determination, reverberated through the room like a battle cry. A tense pause ensued as the Requiem studied her, his eyes narrowing in a mixture of incredulity and a flicker of respect. "You speak of loss and redemption, yet you wear your scars like a badge of honor," he said, stepping closer. "Tell me, Elena, do you truly believe that embracing your past can shield you from its consequences? Or are you merely fooling yourself, clinging to an ideal of peace even as you carry the instincts of a warrior?" His challenge was not merely rhetorical. It was a provocation, a test of the very essence of her dual identity. Elena's mind raced through memories of missions executed with ruthless precision, of comrades lost in the chaos of combat, and of moments when she had teetered on the brink of surrender to darkness. Yet, interwoven with those memories were the teachings of yoga, a reminder that even in the heart of turmoil, one could find the stillness necessary to transcend the cycle of violence. "Strength does not lie solely in the absence of conflict," she countered softly, her eyes locked with his. "It is in our ability to rise above it, to integrate the lessons of the battlefield with the wisdom of compassion. I have learned that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the mastery over it." Her words were both an affirmation of her journey and a declaration of her intent to confront the specter of her past without succumbing to its darkness. At that, the room seemed to vibrate with a palpable tension. The Requiem's hand drifted toward the concealed weapon at his side, but he paused, a hesitation that spoke of a history too complex for simple categorization. "You think you can simply choose a new path?" he murmured, his tone tinged with sorrow. "But you know nothing of the cost that comes with such a choice. The path of redemption is paved with sacrifice, with blood and tears, and it demands that you confront every demon that lurks in your memory." His words echoed the doubts and fears that had haunted Elena during the darkest nights of her former life. Yet, rather than falter, she drew upon the inner reservoir of strength that had been cultivated through years of both battle and meditation. "Every scar, every wound has its purpose," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "They are not marks of weakness but reminders of the battles I have fought, and won. I will face whatever demons I must, because to do otherwise would be to deny the truth of who I am." With that, the final confrontation erupted. In a blur of motion, the Requiem lunged, his movements a blend of calculated aggression and desperation. Elena met him head-on, her body flowing into a defensive stance that melded the fluidity of martial arts with the precision of her special forces training. The ensuing clash was a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow, a violent ballet where every strike and parry was imbued with both the fury of old wounds and the promise of rebirth. They circled each other like predators locked in a primal struggle, the echoes of their confrontation reverberating off the crumbling walls. Elena's strikes were swift and measured, each one a testament to years of discipline. The Requiem's counters were equally precise, his attacks carrying the bitter residue of betrayal and regret. As blows were exchanged and moments of near defeat intermingled with flashes of brilliance, the two combatants seemed to be locked in an eternal duel, each movement a question, each block a defiant answer. Between the thunderous impacts and the rapid cadence of their breaths, Elena's mind raced with a torrent of memories and reflections. She recalled the calm moments spent in quiet meditation, the gentle stretches that had once soothed her soul, and the unyielding discipline that had been forged in the crucible of warfare. Each recollection served as both shield and inspiration, guiding her as she maneuvered through the maelstrom of violence. In the midst of the chaos, she glimpsed the man the Requiem once was, a brilliant operative, a trusted comrade whose descent into darkness had been as tragic as it was inevitable. Their duel reached a fevered pitch as the Requiem, now visibly strained, attempted one final, desperate maneuver, a feint that sought to unbalance Elena and shatter her resolve. In that critical moment, Elena's inner duality coalesced into a singular force. With a swift, almost preternatural motion, she sidestepped the attack and countered with a series of precise, bone-rattling strikes that left him staggering. The impact of her blows was both physical and symbolic, a reclaiming of her identity, a rejection of the chains that had once bound her to a legacy of conflict. For several heartbeats, the room was engulfed in a silence so profound that even the distant hum of the ruined city seemed to pause. The Requiem sank to one knee, his breath ragged, his eyes reflecting a tumult of emotions, pain, regret, and a grudging, reluctant admiration. Elena stood over him, her expression a complex interplay of resolve and sorrow. "This ends now," she declared softly, the finality in her voice resonating like a promise. "I will not be defined by the ghosts of the past, nor will I allow you to rewrite my destiny." In that moment of raw vulnerability, the Requiem's hardened facade cracked. His eyes, once so cold and calculating, filled with a glimmer of remorse. "Perhaps," he whispered, "it was always our fate to clash, not as enemies, but as two souls lost in a maze of duty and regret." His voice trembled as he spoke, each word weighted with the cumulative pain of years spent in the shadows. The confrontation, while physical, had transformed into something more profound, a reckoning of identity and purpose. Elena, with unwavering resolve, extended a hand, not in an offer of forgiveness for what had transpired, but as a symbolic gesture of reclaiming the fragmented pieces of her past. "I choose to move forward," she said, her tone both gentle and firm. "I honor every scar, every memory, but I will not let them dictate who I am or what I must become." As dawn's first light began to filter through the shattered windows of the compound, bathing the room in a soft, amber glow, the final chapter of this long, arduous journey was written in that quiet, defining moment. The Requiem, defeated not only in body but in spirit, slowly receded into the encroaching shadows, a specter of a bygone era, destined to fade as the new day claimed its rightful place. Elena, standing amidst the remnants of chaos and ruin, felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. The duality that had defined her existence, the tender yogi and the unyielding warrior, had merged into a single, resolute identity. In that fusion lay the promise of a future where the lessons of the past would serve as the foundation for a life reimagined. Surrounded by her loyal allies, whose silent nods and steady presences spoke of shared trials and mutual respect, Elena gathered the salvaged evidence, the digital files, the cryptic documents, the remnants of a network built on betrayal, and resolved to expose the darkness that had once threatened to consume her. As the morning sun climbed higher, its golden rays washing away the night's terrors, a new chapter beckoned. One defined not by the weight of regret, but by the triumph of transformation, where every scar was a testament to survival and every step forward was a reclaiming of identity. In that final, cathartic moment, Elena knew that the journey was far from over. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, and the echoes of old battles would sometimes resurface to test her resolve. But she had learned that true strength lay not in denying the past, but in embracing its lessons and forging ahead with unyielding determination. With her heart now unburdened by the ghosts of yesterday and her spirit emboldened by the unity of her allies, she stepped into the light of a new dawn, a dawn where peace and warrior spirit coexisted, guiding her toward a future that was unequivocally her own.